Good evening and welcome to the Monday night edition of Newsmax Prime. I'm J.D. Hayworth. Of prime interest tonight, our Commander-in-Chief encounters judicial combat. He should respond by bringing out the cannons. The way I see it, misinformation, or more accurately, disinformation, accompanied the news we heard late Friday that a federal judge in Seattle halted President Trump's executive order concerning refugees from 7 Mideastern nations. The judge, James Robart, was an appointee of Bush 43, but that doesn't tell the entire story. You see, to prove he was a uniter, not a divider, President Bush allowed Washington State's 2 senators, leftist Democrats Maria Cantwell and Patty Murray, to recommend Robart to the federal bench, and the administration acceded to their suggestion. In exchange for that civility, Democrats repaid Republicans with conflict and confusion. Judge Robart really thinks that his job is to make law, or at the very least, make political pronouncements part and parcel of his decisions. Listen to what he said back in 2015, lamenting policing policies in Seattle.
According to FBI statistics, police shootings resulting in deaths involve 41% black people, despite being only 20% of the population living in those cities. 41% of the casualties, 20% of the population. Black lives matter.
That a sitting federal judge would cite dubious statistics to justify the rationale for the group of rioters known as Black Lives Matter is troubling enough. But what's even worse is that in his order to halt the president's refugee policy, Judge Robart offers no genuine legal rationale. He simply claims without explanation that the executive order may violate the Constitution. Judges of all labels and stripes invoke the Constitution, but what should concern us most about James Robart is another C word, as in canons, and the Code of Conduct for federal judges. Canon 2 speaks specifically about the specter of outside influence and how a judge should not allow family, social, political, or financial relationships to influence his conduct. A quick check of his bio reveals that Judge Robart offered legal services to immigrants from Southeast Asia at no cost. Moreover, he and his wife served as foster parents to immigrant children on their own. Those actions are laudatory. But even more laudatory would have been Judge Robart's recusal from this case because of his personal involvement with refugees and immigrants, in keeping with the judicial canons. At least, that's the way I see it. President Trump doubled down on his executive order today, calling it a matter of national security. But that does not mean our commander-in-chief has closed the deal. Miranda Khan has more.
JD, the deal-maker's action remains in legal limbo land at the moment, and there's a good chance it may stay there for a while.
We need strong programs so that people that love us and want to love our country and will end up loving our country are allowed in.
As the president spoke at Central Command headquarters, which oversees the war on terror, a war wages on over his temporary immigration ban.
We're standing here this morning with 9 people who did absolutely nothing wrong, who had absolutely no reason to be barred from this country, other than the fact that their passport said Yemen on it.
Vice President Mike Pence made the media rounds yesterday defending the president's executive order.
We're very confident the president's operating within his authority as president.
The order temporarily bans people from 7 predominantly Muslim countries from entering the U.S. and a 4-month ban on all refugees.
Clear statutory authority in federal law today gives the president the ability to determine who is given access to this country and who is not.
But a federal judge disagreed.
I find that the court should and will grant the temporary restraining order.
The decision lifted the ban, allowing refugees and some 60,000 foreigners whose visas were canceled to now enter the U.S., at least for now.
Thank you for every single person tried to help me bring my kids back. I'm so happy. I'm so glad.
And just yesterday, the president faced yet another blow after an appeals court denied the Justice Department's request to restore the ban.
It's a signal that the administration must comply with the Constitution and the rules adopted by Congress.
The president tweeted about his frustration on Twitter, saying he couldn't believe a judge would put our country in such peril. And he said that the courts are making the job very difficult, something the vice president expressed as well.
And it's just frustrating to see a federal judge in Washington state conducting American foreign policy or making decisions about our national security.
One bright spot for Trump, the appeals court did say that it would reconsider its decision if it receives additional legal briefs from the Justice Department. Whatever the decision, most legal experts believe this could very well end up on the doorsteps of the Supreme Court. JD, back to you.
Thanks very much, Miranda. Let's talk more about this as we are joined via Skype from New York City by Betsy McCaughey. Betsy, of course, the former lieutenant governor of the Empire State, and via Skype from Newsmax, Washington, John Griffing. John serves as an associate editor for a publication I really like to read online, The Daily Caller. So it's great to have you folks, and let's just review where we were as of Super Bowl Sunday. The Ninth Circuit Court denied the DOJ's request for immediate reinstatement of President Trump's ban on accepting those certain travelers and all refugees. The administration filed the appeal based on the argument that Judge James Robart overreached by, quote, second-guessing the president on the matter of national security. Now, Betsy, I know it's the Ninth Circuit out in San Francisco, but will that argument hold water with others on the federal bench?
Well, I'm very surprised at the appeals court decision, though temporary though it is, because it is clearly within the constitutional purview of the president to make the decision that he made. And when I hear people arguing that refugees or residents of other countries have a, quote, constitutional right to enter the United States, they do not. Those constitutional rights belong only to those who are under the jurisdiction of the United States Constitution, meaning within our borders and our citizens. So I regret that President Trump is being hampered in his very legitimate effort to protect us from terrorists who may have infiltrated refugee groups and also immigrants coming in, even with travelers' visas.
So, John, let me run this theory by you. Minnesota and Washington State, two states lurching to the left, utilize their good offices to go court shopping, especially Washington State, knowing that it is in the Ninth Circuit, where the justices are decidedly leftward, and they understood politically what they were doing by lining this up with a federal judge in Seattle and then having it turned over to the Ninth Circuit in San Francisco. Do you disagree with that theory?
I disagree with anything that violates settled case law, settled precedent. Let the decision stand, stare decisis. Liberals seem to think that that only applies when it serves their political agenda. And there's a host of evidence showing that when a president uses his executive authority to, say, ignore the status of people here illegally or grant them relief, as Obama did and presidents before him have done, liberals have no problem with this kind of use of executive authority. They simply have a problem with us actually enforcing our borders and actually protecting the American people from groups like ISIS and the 9/11 hijackers, all of whom were illegal immigrants.
You know, Betsy, the other thing that's trouble. Go ahead, Betsy. Go ahead.
I'd like to raise one additional issue here. Even though these refugees may be allowed to enter now, they will rely on State Department funding and Department of Health and Human Services funding to pay for their existence, their apartment, their food, their clothing, their everything for the next 8 months. And I would urge President Trump and the administration, as shorthanded as they are at the moment because their cabinet nominees haven't been confirmed yet, to just simply cut off that funding.
Well, John, let me turn to you because we are reminded, and indeed Judge Gorsuch prefaced his remarks in the East Room of the White House after becoming the Supreme Court nominee the other night by citing Mr. Justice Jackson. Justice Robert Jackson famously observed that the Constitution is not a suicide pact. Now, you take what Betsy just said about us footing the bill for all of these refugees, it's bad enough fiscally, but in terms of national security, for all intents and purposes, do the actions of the judge in Seattle and perhaps the circuit judge or the circuit court in San Francisco, basically, could it be considered a suicide clause, actually using the Constitution to hasten our own problems in terms of national security?
Yes, J.D., absolutely. In fact, if you look at the Soviet Union, I mean, or Germany, circa 1933, all of these things were accomplished with a vote, with a democratic vote. But simply voting one time to end all voting is not really the democratic process we're used to here in the West. So, no, I would argue that a judge, not only, he in this case, is he exceeding his authority, the limits on his power established by the Constitution, but he's violating established, settled precedent on the issue of immigration and the authority it gives the president to act in these kinds of cases. I cite specifically INS v. Chadha from 1983. This case has come up repeatedly in the last 20 years, and the court, the High Court, Supreme Court, consistently decides in favor of the president in repelling and expelling threats to the country.
And it will probably end up at the Supreme Court, as Miranda Khan mentioned, because it is of such national importance and obviously something where time is of the essence, and that time is being frittered away. Speaking of the four-letter word known as time, Betsy, John, we want you to stay right where you are because we need your comments on some other matters. And this curious note from Moscow, the Kremlin now demanding Fox News apologize for one of its commentators' comments on Vladimir Putin. We'll talk about that and more as we continue.